Our task today is to really wrestle with this concept of borders, really the thing that brought everybody together. As you know, at the beginning of this project, one of the things that Ray was really interested in was around, the impact of borders after our COVID closures, and so particularly for borders communities and the impacts that they had. I think the beauty of this discussion today is that everybody comes here with a very different perspective. Peter as a performer, amazing performer with an embodied performance practice through body weather and other forms of performance practice. We have Craig, who's an ecologist, who you would have all probably engaged in some of his walks and the information that he's trying to connect us through his discipline to the place that we're in. And also Ray, who has a long history of community facilitation, of artistic practice, of trying to think through this world, through the skills that they have, in order to facilitate other people's flourishing, maybe is a word you could use.
I guess observing the impacts of border closures on communities and how that separation was affecting us, but then also watching how during times of lockdown, people were drawn back to the river and just how busy it was down there, and that people were really reconnecting to nature in that way that I thought was really beautiful. And I just thought it was an interesting juxtaposition, I suppose, that this beautiful living, breathing thing can also just be a line, and that line can have so much impact.
When the project first began, I had that hard idea of borders. That seemed to be the one that was at the forefront of the project at that stage, in a way, because there was the COVID that had split the cross-border communities that we'd been dealing with. And I was also thinking of how rivers are actually used politically to become a border. They're not necessarily a border, but they're used as a line on a map. I was thinking of how Indigenous people may have not seen a straight line until we put them on maps, or till we brought fences. And I was thinking of the Murray-Darling Basin, and how it's a basket case because of borders. But what I thought I could bring was a sense that I had developed of permeability, where it was clear to me that we have borders inside our bodies, around our organs and between our organs, and they're all designed to be permeable in some way, so that your lungs, for instance, take in air from outside, and then they're permeable so that it can get into the blood. And there are different boundaries between us and the environment. We're entangled with the environment.
Yeah, I guess my initial thoughts were that when I was asked to think about borders in an ecological way, I thought, there's not many hard borders in nature. And so I started introducing concepts like transitional zones, because a lot of the time there isn't this hard boundary between one community and the next. There's these transitions, or ecotones as they're referred to, where you have some species slowly dropping out and you have some species slowly coming in, and how those transitional zones are often some of the most biodiverse areas because they have members of both communities existing in that space in the middle.
How do we bring this together? How do we bring people together across multiple border communities to think about this and practice through these kinds of thinking?
And I think it felt kind of clunky at the start. If I sort of break it down into the 3 years of the project, the first year was we were still experiencing lockdowns and travel restrictions. So my proposal for the recovery fund of the challenges we were still deep in meant that I couldn't go on the road and be in community, which is what I'd planned to do. But our online sessions became a really good place to start some of those conversations. So in that initial stage, it was sort of more curated in a sense that we would set topics. We'd gather the artists online and we talked about things like methods of creative inquiry, links between art and farming, archaeology of borders, and we talked about where our borders are now when we were experiencing the floods. So those conversations kind of enabled that place-based regenerative research to come into it. But then once we were able to actually start getting into community and going out on the road and the labs begun, this embodied methods of research, we were able to engage in that in a really deep way.
And,
and
the beauties of this project was the interdisciplinary cohort of people that you had. You had people coming from very different perspectives of visual arts, of ecology, of performing arts, who are all bringing their own, self-constructed and imposed on them borders to the project that they're trying to work through.
Because I immediately found the similarities to my own sort of thinking, and it was just being very observant of your environment. My job is to be observant of my environment, catalogue things that are around me, investigate things, and breaking down those borders between your body and the environment, and to let that environment in a little bit.
One was engaging with Craig, who's a sort of living ecotone, full of this rich information about ecology that is between us and the environment. So I had tried to learn about our relationship to the environment, but that was incredibly enriched by what Craig offered and incredibly complicated. And even in this last few days, my life's been made richer and more difficult by having things turned upside down for me by Craig's suggestion that matter doesn't come from here, it comes from there. So that has changed the way I see the problem of how we relate to the environment, which I think is almost the major problem that's living in the arts at the moment. I see so many people engage with that issue of how do we change the border between ourselves and the environment.
I'm really grateful for Regional Arts Australia to fund a 3-year process. I'd only ever worked on short-term projects before, so it really was a design-as-you-go thing. We had to be so responsive to just where community were at, how people were feeling, what was going on, particularly around times of floods. There's just ongoing challenges to deal with. I don't think that we recover from any particular thing. I think we're in a state of ongoing recovery. And I think what we've managed to design over the last 3 years in this really responsive kind of way is a method, I guess, of that creative recovery for art, not just for artists, but for community as well. Now it's just this completely cyclical, spherical, it's not linear, and there's no, the time and the space is just limitless, and it's such a gift now to be able to stand in the environment and close my eyes and just actually feel that and know that that's there. So I think that's probably the best way I can try and summarise how my concept of borders has developed. And that my ability to explore that question has been expanded so much, the methods of inquiry that we have layered over time with all of these different perspectives and practices and knowledges and people from different places. It just layers and layers and layers like a lasagna. And the future, something we've been talking a lot about as a group is how do we capture the impact of these types of projects and working in this way. And I've already started working on proposals of other projects we can do, using this kind of framework of research that we've built together. And I think the next step is really learning how to share the stories and the value of this type of work so we can advocate for more support for longer, deeper, slower projects.
The idea of this project wasn't to solve any ideas around borders. It wasn't to provide definitions. It was to ask questions that could remain unanswered. And I think, there were some important words in some of those descriptions of that being for ourselves, our communities and our place. think what it's done is to create that word that you just said, curiosity, and inquiry, modes of inquiry for the artists that have participated to understand how do we question, how do we navigate, how do we hold things that are unknown. These are all sort of qualities that would make, as I mentioned, a quote from Deborah Bird Rose, our world more livable. And so I think this is what comes out of a project like this.